Welcome, everyone. Glad you can make it to tonight's live audience, as well as everyone watching and listening in the future on the VOD. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I should say, just going to go through a bit of housekeeping, a couple of introductions. Hopefully, not take more than 3 minutes of your time. Firstly, hi. Me, the little rainbow background person. My name's Dan. My pronouns are they, them. I broadly describe myself as neurodivergent with autism and suspected ADHD, as well as being, more importantly, the community manager for Playing Attention, which is a group dedicated to raising awareness and providing support to professionals with ADHD in the games industry. If you'd like to learn more about our work, resources, or to join our community, you'll find links in the chat, which I'll be posting, as well as at the end of the talk. I know Adam already just gave us our sales pitch, but we'll go with it. That said, this talk is being recorded, so please feel free to turn off your webcams if you feel more comfortable. Turn off your microphones as well, mute them. We will also be making the presentation slides available after the talk as a PDF. Again, link will be in the chat very shortly. Finally, as we said on the event page, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the main talk, where you'll be able to ask Susie and Dom questions. I'll be collecting those from the live audience, so if you have something that you'd like answered or discussed, please put your questions in the chat, as well as a preferred name or pronouns if you feel comfortable doing so. And with that, I will hand it over to two amazing people who I'm sure need no introductions, but they're going to do one anyway. Please, everyone, send clap emojis for Susi Bauer and Dom Shaw.
And also clap emojis for Dan for that very, very fast intro, like amazing. And you'll find it in the chat. So hi, everyone. I'm Susie. I go by she or they pronouns are fine. I now work as a freelance training designer and also since last week an ADHD coach. So I just finished my course that I've been taking. But before that, I worked in the UK games industry for the last 10 years. I spent 7 years at Jagex, making RuneScape and putting terrible puns into languages in the game. I did a bit of DEI work as well, and then I worked for Into Games, which is a career nonprofit helping people get into the games industry. So that's where my expertise comes from. And as a person, I would qualify myself as a bilingual, bisexual, chaotic good hobbit with ADHD. So that's my credibility here is my own neurodivergent brain. And then I have with me Dom.
Hi everyone, I'm Dom Shaw, pronouns he, him. I lead EDI, which stands for Equality, Diversity, Inclusion work at Yuki, which is the trade body for video games, including the award-winning Raise the Game initiative, which again I manage. And in essence, the only difference really is Raise the Game allows the work to go beyond membership and support the wider industry. So I've been in this ecosystem of UK games for over 10 years, and it's only in the last 5 years of that I've been really doing this work, including sharing as much possible around neurodiversity to support people. I'm also neurodivergent myself, with autism, dyslexia, and traces of ADHD and OCD. So mixing hot pot of it, and I'm also openly gay or LGBTQ plus individual as well. So I'm very much here to share and spread some love.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dom. Okay, so with us out of the way, just a little overview of what you can expect in the talk today. First, we're going to give you a quick run of what neurodivergence is. Then we're going to talk about how do you land in games with neurodivergence, how do you navigate work once you're in it, and how do you avoid burnout once you're in the work. So let's start off with the term, because you might hit neurodivergence and neurodiverse. So neurodivergent just means includes a range of neurological differences that you might be showcasing. It's an umbrella term, and it contains a spectrum of the brain wiring that is different to norm. And that includes conditions like ADHD, autism, all the dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and so on. And there are also often comorbidities, which we might experience. So in some cases, Also, long-term mental health issues might come under the neurodivergence umbrella if the mental health issues last long enough that they have a lasting impact on your brain and functioning. So that's the overall, the big term. And then more specifically, there's two conditions we're going to talk a little bit more about today from our own lived experiences, but all these others are valid and sometimes are also kind of correlated. So I, like I said, have ADHD. If you do the term, it's short for attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which sounds gruesome, right? It sounds terrible, disorder and deficit. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not that we have a deficit of attention. Our brain just regulates it differently and sometimes not as effectively as we can. And growing up with ADHD means we might experience an up to 30% developmental delay in executive functions. And that's often what makes the condition so tricky. So executive function is our working memory, self-monitoring, controlling our impulses, regulating our emotions, being flexible, planning and prioritization, task initiation, organization. All of these things are important for work and they can be affected by our ADHD. It's not that it's a terrible thing, you just might have to learn how to deal with it, and we'll talk about it a bit more today. But yeah, that's ADHD in a nutshell. And then Dom can tell you about autism.
Autism, it is often characterized as a spectrum disorder that encompasses a multitude of wide-ranging presentations and experiences. And it can manifest very differently. I mean, one of the most common stereotypes is everyone with it has a set manner, but actually it's very different. But the most common traits that people often associate with autism is communication and socializing difficulties, repeated behaviors, whether that's due to stimming, which is a way of releasing extra energy, whether that's from overloading or over positivity. And generally, it's better to kind of understand these traits as, again, as we've already discussed, as varying factors, because again, sometimes it can correlate with other neurodivergencies while also presenting as a sole element. But often the diagnosing process has a set criteria and provides recognizing and supporting individuals in various contexts. And with that in mind as well, as you all have come in, whether you identify with neurodivergency or you're wanting to learn more, from recent data, as in the last 5 years, we see more and more of the games industry brimming with neurodiverse talent. The UK industry census that Yuki created, or the latest edition of it back in 2022, highlighted that at least 18% of the industry identified as neurodiverse. And I just want to highlight that that is definitely a benchmark, because if we were truly able to capture everyone and probably grow the spectrum of how many people we could get to take part in the census, that number would grow. So we're constantly saying that not only for a sense of discovery, but also a sense of openness, which is excellent, because obviously we want to see this talent brimming and being uplifted in the industry. And then, you know, talking about the diagnosis process, it is often, as the quote you can see on screen, it is often a privilege and hard to access, especially because of how geological and cost-related factors can be in relation. However, whatever you are on your journey to understanding your brain, we just wanted to let you know you're valid and wonderful, regardless whether you self-refer or you have the diagnosis. It's all valid and amazing, because, again, neurodiversity includes everyone, and it's all about accepting and bringing in those different variations and perspectives together in harmony.
Exactly. the reason why we mention that diagnosis is a privilege, and why we also mention very specifically that we accept self-diagnosis here, is diagnosis is not easy to get. And just for people who might be in the audience and are thinking, maybe I am neurodivergent and I want to get diagnosed and don't know where to start, we wanted to give you like a really super quick overview of how you can do it. So there's 3 vague pathways. The first one is the NHS route. In that case, you go to your GP, you tell them you would like to be referred for a diagnosis, and then usually they just pass you on to the next local service. The problem with this is the wait list in some areas very strongly, but they can be up to 10 years at the current moment. The NHS is really overloaded. An alternative you have is you can still go to your GP and ask for a referral, but rather than them sending you to their normal services, you can say, actually, I would like to evoke my right to choose. And you can select and bring papers of a clinic that accepts referrals of NHS patients. There's some online services like Psychiatry UK, ADHD 360, and some others. So definitely worth a Google afterwards. So look for right to choose and diagnosis you're after, in which case your GP can refer you to them through the NHS. And then your wait time might be a bit shorter. For example, I took the first route first, and after 1.5, actually 2 years, I was nowhere. Then I got booted because I moved house. And then I went back and used right to choose second time. And then I got diagnosed after 6.5 months. That's the good news. The bad news is there's still sometimes wait lists, right? I got diagnosed last August and I'm still on the wait list to receive medication. So it's been more than 10 months after they said it would be 7 months. So it is a lot of paperwork involved and it can be painful, but it's free. The last option you have to go get diagnosed is you can go private. Private diagnosis, however, is costly. It can cost you between 600 and up to several thousands. You get even just diagnosed by a psychiatrist. And then afterwards, you also have to carry the cost of the regular medication while you're being adjusted to it. And also you might have to pay for the appointments pockets, which can all cost you monthly over several hundred, which is a lot. So generally, as a little tip, A, obviously look at right to choose, and B, check your insurance companies, because some employers might have insurances that cover private diagnosis. So that's really good to look out for. If you're working, definitely check. And yeah. And also just to explain, why would you even want diagnosis? Here's a meme for you. Getting diagnosed with ADHD as an adult feels like being told you suck at Mario Kart your whole life, and then find out your game generates 40 times more banana peels than it's supposed to. So diagnosis does our life generally easier, but it just means we can understand and put things into context. But also, if you don't want to do it because you're like, I don't need the help the service is offering, I'm just fine knowing self-diagnosis is fine. So that was a quick one. Let's go into identifying and starting your career. So for those who are currently trying to find them games or figure out where they want to work, here's some like neurodivergent perspectives. First, starts with figuring out what you want to be. And sometimes I met people who are neurodivergent who were a bit unsure like how to embrace their perspective, and I just wanted to touch on both extremes. So the one thing I see a lot is people that have their super special interest and they're really passionate about it. Like, you know, they might be the person who loves tinkering around in the engine and just make the really hard stuff work. And sometimes they might feel like, oh, I have to learn all these other skills. But actually, if you have that, if you have your special interest, like, you know, go into it, become an expert and let your love matter shine through. Like, don't be afraid to show some of your enthusiasm for the problems. So that's really great. You can use that. The other end of the spectrum we sometimes see, and I've been there myself, I'm definitely the second one. I had a lot of interest and transferable skills. And if someone asks me what job I want to do, it's like anything as lots games, but that doesn't always help people hiring you. So in that case, what I recommend is just figure out all your transferable skills, figure out all the things you're really interested in, you're good in. If you picked up lots of hobbies in the past, pick out what did that teach you about game making, and then figure out different jobs that match that, but have like all your CVs ready. Like, this is my CV for community management. This is my CV for QA. This is my CV for this. So still tailor, but you know, you don't have to, like, no one's going to tell if you apply to different jobs. Just be clear in your messaging and how you bring things across. But if you still don't know what you want to do and you're still in the research stage, here's some resources you can use. So one of them is you can use Into Games. They have a website with careers overview, and they also have a fantastic resource library, which I'm still curating and built for them. So you can check them out. There's an entry-level skills report, which gives you an overview of the 8 or 9 most common entry-level jobs in the games industry and really breaks it down with what are some example CVs, what is some advice, what are the knowledge, skills, and behaviors of this job. And lastly, you could try to find a mentor. Limit Break actually just closed their doors recently, and they're in the matching phase now. So if you missed it this year, you might have to wait until next year. But finding a mentor, either through community, it might be a really good way of leveling up your skills. Next step, applying for jobs. As a neurodivergent person, it can be quite useful to research company, like check out Glassdoor and LinkedIn, what are employees saying about them, what are their experiences when it comes to treating people who are neurodivergent. Maybe also be active in some games communities, and we'll have recommendations of those later. And check their website. Do they mention any policies or employee resource groups or network that have more about like how specifically they're supporting people who are neurodivergent? And also, it's important to know that you have a right to ask for reasonable adjustments when you're applying for jobs. And that might look like us requesting clear communication, like, hey, it would really help me if I got an agenda of the meetings, or if you have to come into the office to do some on-the-job trial, ask, is there a quiet space for exercises because I can focus better there? Or share your communication preferences. You are allowed to request these things, but I know it's sometimes hard to do that. The research can help you get a sense if it feels safe or not to do this within the company. And then we can't talk about applying for jobs if we don't touch upon rejection, because I think that's something that you will experience quite a lot and at any stage, because applying for jobs always sucks, and getting a no when you apply for a job can really suck extra hard. So that's a generally, as a human, not a great experiences, but for people with neurodivergence, some of us might experience something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, short RSD, something you can look up. And for people, what that looks like, it can actually feel like extremely painful if they get real or even just perceived rejection. It doesn't even have to be someone trying to reject you. It might just feel like you've been rejected. It can feel like depression. It can feel like rage. It can be different forms. But generally, it's like a really strong reaction to rejection. That's a nice rhyme. So the first thing is always important to remember, even if it's hard, that often it's really not you. Often it's even not your CV, it's just the insane levels of competition. The games industry is really, really heavily combated when it comes to trying to get into entry-level roles. And then there's some things you can try. The first thing you can do, or I recommend you do, is try to delay any reactions, because often we just want to fire back and we're going to want, why not, or what's wrong with you? Try to step away from it until you have managed your emotions a bit better. And how to manage your emotions, you can try something called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or self-compassion therapy, exercises to just help yourself go through it. I'm just sharing some self-compassion exercise because CBT is talked about a lot, and this one not so much, but I quite like it. So what that could look like is you can start trying to just be mindful. Write down your feelings, write down everything you feel, and don't try to censor yourself. Just let it go. You know, I feel really angry. I'm super unhappy. I'm really depressed. And just allow it. Don't try to push it away. It's like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. Just write it all down, let it all out, and just try to hold it and be okay with it. The second step you do in self-compassion exercise, you try to remind yourself of your common humanity. So you can try to identify and write down how it is part of being human, what you're going through right now. So for example, when you get rejected from it, you might feel like, I am such a terrible person because I got rejected from the job and it didn't want me as an individual. But when you look at it and say, like, 1,000 people applied to this job, 999 of them didn't get a job. I'm one of them. There's 998 other people that are going through the same thing. And even just reminding ourselves of these numbers and of that thing that we all go through can help a little bit. And the last one is, I find the hardest, but is really helpful if you can do it, is self-kindness. So write to yourself as you would write to a friend. Imagine your friend didn't get a job. You wouldn't tell them they're useless and terrible. You would say like, wow, that really sucks. How are you doing? So that's a nice 3-step exercise you can try for yourself as an experiment when you are experiencing RSD, either in application processes or otherwise. And again, we'll share the slides later. So if you can't follow all of this, don't worry. And I hand back over to Dom because I just talked a lot. So.
But also, it's a perfect segue because obviously we've mentioned quite a bit about disclosure, and often people feel that when they're applying, should they disclose? It's often said that after people have been in a job for a while, they could disclose. But again, similar to before about, regardless whether diagnosed or not, it doesn't matter. Similar with disclosure, you can highlight when you apply, you can highlight after you started, or you may never. Disclosure is completely a personal choice. There is no right or wrong way about it. It's all about your own personal comfort and decision. For example, when applying, if you feel safe and you want accommodations, putting in the disclosure during the interview and recruitment process will allow you to get more out of the process. But then equally, you may want to be in the role for a few months and see how things are and start to build that rapport. Or you may never want to disclose, which is, again, do what's best for you. And equally, it kind of reflects and circles back to some of the points that Susie mentioned before. For example, when you're looking up a company, do the research and make sure everything works with them, because what you might find out is actually they might not support you in the way you want them to. And equally, if you're putting in 4 reasonable adjustments during the recruitment process and they're not carried out, that can be a sign as well. So it's really important to just always think to yourself how comfortable you are with disclosure. And overall, tips and tricks of this kind of last piece of content that we both thought about from an employer/manager perspective, that they're very simple things, but they're inclusive and they are so strong if implemented daily and with care, which is our first point, is communicate with care. Ask about preferences. Don't demand one hand fits all approach if you're an employer or manager, because by doing that, you're limiting especially your neurodiverse talent. Options and choices and the flexibility of the flow of how they work is what brings out the best. So by inquiring and asking about how they want to be provided information, both written and verbally, be clear of what, by, when, and why, and providing agendas in advance and considering sharing advanced information like interview questions or other information that can support this communication with care will ultimately do the talent justice. But equally, this can be applied to the entire workforce and your entire candidacy. And what you'll find is more and more people will respond and want to be part of your organization or be led by you because you show them that care and interest. It's also worth noting to be sensory friendly. So whether this is similar to what we're doing now via an online or an in-person, always think about the sensory aspects of it, such as lighting, the noise levels of your environment, and overall just try to keep a balance between it all, because too much bright lights and too loud of an environment, regardless whether online or in person, may not be friendly to someone who needs a bit of the opposite. And check for biases when you're going through this process, because for example, eye contact, especially with this camera, you can always look that way or that way or that way, but actually by not demanding something that's traditionally demanded, you just find that actually you're focusing more on the words, more on the content of the person, rather than traditional mannerisms that don't really play too much effect into the quality of the talent you've got in front of you. And most of all, make sure all your staff are on board with these kind of practices. Train your recruitment staff. It doesn't mean, they have to be exact perfect, because we are not machine robots. However, this is an improvement. This is a process about bringing people on a journey and having everyone on board and being aware and supportive. So by keeping these matters in place and learning more and supporting that kind of neuro inclusion environment, you're doing yourself and everyone that comes into your environment, whether a candidate or a future employee, justice.
Awesome. Okay, so Dom can tell you a bit more about the rights you have when working in games as well.
Excellent. So in terms of rights, we've already talked about reasonable adjustments quite a bit. And just to emphasize as well, thanks to the Equalities Act, any employee in the UK is given reasonable adjustments as by their right through employment law. So regardless whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, within current UK legislation through the Equalities Act, everyone is guaranteed some form of reasonable adjustments. Now, the difference between that, and this is something we might be able to get through in the question section, is how do you determine what are reasonable adjustments? And they are a mixture of policy and legal writing, but that doesn't prevent certain adjustments being put into place, such as having a digital notepad available and provided to you alongside other assistant technologies like headphones or softwares such as subtitles or transcriptions, tools to help you focus and do your work more effectively, like stimming toys or visual timers. Or you may be able to acquire assistants.
Yeah, do you want me to take back over?
Yeah. Oh, well, I thought that was a good segue. But
Sorry, I missed my cue there. Yes. So another thing Access to Work can fund for you is an assistant. So some people get a virtual assistant through Access to Work. For example, if you're struggling to stay on top of your emails and inboxes, and no matter how hard you try, you can't get organized, there might be a chance to actually get that through the government. And lastly, you can also get Access to Work to pay for coaching for you. So for example, there is specific ADHD coaching, which is something I'm providing now, but there's also, I've seen coaches who are specialized in other aspects of neurodiversity, such as autism. And what coaching does, it kind of can be a useful addition to getting medication, because there's this nice saying that pills don't give skills. Because just because you're getting medication, you now may be dealing with some symptoms, but you lived your whole life as someone who's neurodivergent and maybe doesn't really know how some of the aspects of that might affect you. So a coach can help you. And Access to Work is a grant-funded thing. You can apply to it on your own. Your employer will support you, or should support you with this. And actually, there is funding of up to £66,000 per person per year available. Applications usually take up to 6 months. So and you don't have to also be diagnosed. That's another important thing to say. You don't have to be diagnosed. You just have to make sure that you can lay out how you're struggling and why you're struggling at work, either with neurodivergence or mental health, and you should be able to claim this. So definitely worth looking that up.
And just to reiterate on Access to Work, so all the elements that we talked about before are reasonable adjustments that can be put into place. Well, Access to Work is a government-approved scheme that can support you put those in place. And as Susie just mentioned there, can help partly fund a lot of those resources.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's good. Okay, I'm going to go into this next. And this is the ADHD edition, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. If you have ADHD and you're in the workplace, whether in games or elsewhere, what are some things that are good to know about? First of all, is this real to anyone? yeah, something you've been putting off for weeks that wouldn't take longer than 15 minutes to complete. Me, I've definitely done this, sometimes up to 3 months, simplest task. And then I finally did it and I was like, why didn't I do it before? So sometimes people want to help us. If we're neurodivergent, they want to give us some advice that works for them, and it's often well-meaning advice. But here is whether you're neurodivergent yourself and you're wondering why these don't work, or whether you are a well-meaning manager and you're trying to help people by giving advice. I'm going to give you some controversial opinions, what I think about these things. There's something called Eat the Frog, which is a productivity method that dictates you should do the most difficult thing first thing in the morning, so it's out of your way, and afterwards, in theory, you feel relaxed. Now, the problem is, in ADHD, we sometimes lack dopamine. And if you don't have enough dopamine in your brain, it's really hard to do anything, let alone something that's really difficult. So actually, for you, it might work better to do the really easy things first, to build up some dopamine levels and get a sense of achievement, and then go like, maybe I can do the hard thing now. Next one, Pomodoro method. Pomodoro method is you set a 25-minute timer, you take a 5-minute break. You set a 25 minutes focus timer, you take a 5-minute break. That worked great for me for a while. I was like, ooh, I found the holy grail. And then it stopped working. And I was like, why? So first of all, why it worked for me was because it was new, and new is shiny and shiny is good. But after a while, I actually realized I struggled with it because ADHD can affect our ability to initiate tasks and switch tasks, both which are happening here every 25 minutes. So again, this might not work for you if you're neurodivergent. If it does, awesome, use it. But if it doesn't, don't beat yourself up, because your brain might not like it. Lists. Everyone who has ADHD would probably be very rich if I got a pound every time someone told them to make a list. A list is great, but not if you have issues with your working memory. So you write your list and you put it away and then you never look at it again. So making a list might help sometimes to clear up your brain, but it's not a safeguard against things. And lastly, we like to be encouraging and tell people, oh, just do it, to make them feel like this is easy, and to make them feel like, oh, you can do it. It's really easy. The problem is sometimes we really struggle to do the easy things because our brain just yells, no. And then if someone tells me, oh, it's easy, it just makes me feel more ashamed. And then once I'm ashamed, there's even less of a chance in getting it done. So here's just some things to watch out for and maybe remove from your inventory of advice to people with ADHD. So what can you do instead if you want to tackle tasks and the productivity advice doesn't work? One thing that really helped me, so I'm sharing it here, is there's a theory of the interest-based nervous system, and that people with ADHD best work if any of these things are present. If several of them are present, even better. So our brain likes tasks that are either novel or interesting, like part of our super special hyper interest of the moment. They're challenging, maybe, they're really fun and challenging to do, or there's extreme urgency. And I mean extreme urgency, not just, ooh, there's a vague deadline, but if I don't get this done by midnight, I'm going to die and my life is going to end. This level of urgency. So if you have a task where neither of these are present, you might really struggle with this. For example, really boring bureaucracy tasks. That might not work for you. So what you can do is just acknowledge, this has none of the nice things. My brain is bored. I don't like it. And that's fine. And not feeling ashamed about it. And then maybe ask yourself, like, how can I add any of these elements? For example, you might introduce challenge by make it playful. So some tips that people with ADHD use that works for them is buddy doubling. Some people work better if they see someone else working as well. And I've done this before, that I just had a friend of mine on camera who was working on something I wanted to work on. And when I got distracted, I look at them and I was like, they're working, I should be working. So it's silly, but it works. So that might be working for you. The next thing, adding fun. If you, maybe the Pomodoro method is boring, but maybe I don't want to clean the kitchen, but what if I roll a D20 and if it's whatever it says, this is how many minutes I have to clean the kitchen. Can I clean the kitchen in 2 minutes? How much of the kitchen can I clean in 15 minutes? So adding fun to it can sometimes be a really nice way to making things more fun. Or you might build your own rituals. Maybe you have a badass hoodie, which you only put on when you're doing the hard stuff, or you light a special candle. This is my special candle for focus. So I light a candle when I focus on something. So when I smell it, I'm like, it's the smell of work. So whatever works, for you, just do it and find what works for you and don't beat yourself up if it doesn't. Just again, to clarify that that's another helpful meme. A lot of people think ADHD is procrastinating things they want to do. But guess what? I procrastinate things I do want to do. It's really frustrating that often we procrastinate things we care about. So as a team member or manager, how can you support this? First, just ask, how can I help? Instead of telling, you should try this, ask them, what do you need? What do you need from me? Avoid saying that it's easy because it can induce shame. Avoid just being like super nice and it's like, oh, do it whenever. Because if there's no deadline at all, my brain will be like, cool, whenever becomes never. So maybe just negate and set a good deadline that's doable. And also try not to say that's an excuse, because we tend to do that. And it's often really confusing because you're trying to explain yourself. Usually a person will really try very hard to get themselves understood. So just stay curious and try to figure out what's going on with them. And check in, do your tools and systems work with them? And now I'm going to hand back over to Dom, and he can tell you more about working in games and being yourself.
Thank you. So as kind of we went from that segment, it is all about kind of bringing your full self to work. However, it can feel difficult at times due to what's called masking, almost having a metaphorical version of yourself that's dumbed down to be accepted within neurotypical environments. And this quote here is something that me and Susie really resonated with when creating this presentation. Through masking is incredibly taxing and causes us a lot of external turmoil, it is rewarded and facilitated by neurotypical people. Masking makes autistic people easier to deal with, it renders us complacent and quiet, and it also traps us, which can feel a lot of truth a lot of times. And as kind of emphasized, it does distress, can cause physical and mental exhaustion, feelings of disconnection and isolation, loss of self, and low self-esteem. However, it is all importantly why a lot of the stuff we've talked about so far of working with the right employer and being in an environment that uplifts you rather than pushes you down, because that can strain on your well-being. And actually what we don't want in everyday working is masking. What we want to see is what happens when you unmask, and what it generally looks like is you being able to bring your full self to work, showing your enthusiasm, your passion, your dedication. Info dumping, which is a very much more rising term, and which is essentially not just chit chat or putting a lot of exposition. It is quite literally passionately talking about everything you love. You could say that this entire presentation is info dumping to all of you. And no eye contact and neutral faces aren't looked down upon, but are just seen as, oh, that's that person, how they engage. Or saying no to things and not always having to say yes to deadlines. Obviously, if it's a vital one, maybe, but actually not going yes to everything and going, oh, no, actually, I need to step back from this, or, oh, I'm doing this. Because neurodiverse people are, as the word says, people as well. And doing things alone shouldn't be looked down upon or seen as something skeptical, but actually we often, whether it's due to confidence, comfortability, or other factors, we can just do things like going to the cinema or getting on with work alone. But that doesn't mean we can't work in teams or do body doubling at times. And as mentioned before, with stimming, I am definitely someone who flaps and just moves the body around, and being able to express and push out that either over enthusiasm through your body or release those stressful moments without fear of being criticized for it is, again, healthy for you and shows an inclusive environment. And then another quote from the same book is, refusing to perform neurotypically is a revolutionary act of disability justice. It's also a radical act of self-love, which again is something that resonates with us, because it's a true statement, and why shouldn't it be pushed forward? Plus, as this meme shows, wouldn't it be better just to casually walk around just being like, yes, yes, rather than having to be dumbed down and be like, yes, yes. I know for certain I prefer the left side of the image rather than the right, because I've already gone through that, and no doubt all of you have already gone through that as well. So with that in mind, that sense of finding the right people or communities is so vital. And with today's session being hosted by Playing Attention, who are one of our examples, but there are other communities within the video game space that are also empowering and advocating for neuro inclusion, such as Autistica Play, which is an initiative by Autistica, the research charity in the UK, without it going too redundant, and also the Neurodiversity Divergent Game Dev Collective, which equally has a great community and works to advocate and spread the love. There are also many other communities in the greater diversity and inclusion space that you can see on the screen now, and we do towards the end of our presentation have a links to all of them. So within the PDF or however format you'd like to see these, please either ask later or take a screenshot. And never feel like the next meme that we're about to put on screen right now, where you're just sitting there just thinking, oh, what are my answers? And you're just like, oh, all of these answers are horrible. Especially when it comes to certain ones like Sheldon Cooper. It's like, no, not like Sheldon Cooper. And no, I don't care if your cousin can't speak. Good for them, but also shut up. So with that in mind, to kind of bring that back to the less positive chaos to the more, what can we suggest for team members and managers, highlight and look into some of the terminology we've used today, such as stimming, thinking about meltdowns and shutdowns and how people express themselves, including as well masking, but also different ways of paying attention for both parties. That's not just a matter of putting the onus on the neurodiverse talent, but also actually going, how can I pay attention and provide that support? As Susie said in one of the previous slides, always ask why and always bring the questions to learn more to the talent rather than expecting them to know the answer straight away. And don't make social stuff mandatory, specifically, oh, let's go down to the pub every week. And if you don't, you're excluded from our society within the workplace. No. Think about having remote sessions or doing alternative activities. May that be D&D, whether that's a fashion show or a theatre trip. Socializing can be more than just down the pub on a Friday night. And again, back to that co-communication styles, be direct and specific, and always ask how people would like to communicate and receive feedback. Because by doing that, we recognize and appreciate people as themselves and can unmask more in the workplace. And then just as some quick resources to highlight from my own side, obviously, as I mentioned at the start, I run the Raise the Game initiative where we can support in these aids. There's also the Empower Up Toolkit platform that Raise the Game created with Amicus, the award-winning recruitment specialist. It's a comprehensive EDI guidance resource and hub that has a lot of information, not just on neurodiversity, but also wider forms of diversity as well. And if you're looking for training, I would recommend the National Autistic Society's online material, as it's really authentic to the experience of being neurodivergent, specifically with obviously their expertise in mind around autism.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that summary. And lastly, we get to avoiding burnout, because we already talked about some of the issues with ADHD and autism, and they're often actually quite related or have a high chance of burnout. And here's the last meme of the day for you. If you relate, I'm sorry, let's try to bring that down a little bit. But so what are signs of burnout? Because that can often kind of creep up on us over time. And often we also mix up burnout with just constant stress. So burnout is what happens after constant stress. While we're in constant stress, things might be highly strung, but still be okay. Once we hit burnout, it's a bit harder to recover. So it looked like feeling constantly drained and extremely tired, feeling really helpless and trapped. For me, a big one when I got into burnout was actually noticing my change in attitude at some point. I gone from someone who was really positive about everything to being really cynical about things I cared about and negative. So if you notice that your whole like personality stuff shift, that might be like a big warning sign. If you're in burnout, you might feel detached or lonely, as if you're not part of what's going on anymore. You might feel like a constant sense of overwhelm and overcommitment. You might have heightened emotional responses. Again, I'm usually a quite more of like balanced person. I got so angry suddenly at everything. I was like, what's wrong with me? Or you might also just be sad more easily or start crying at things that you didn't stress you out so much. And especially if you have autism, there is some research that suggests that people with autism who experience burnout might have an increased sensory sensitivity on top of the already stronger emotions of that. So it appears after prolonged stress. So it's very important we protect ourselves. Why the higher chance for us to get into burnout is we already talked about masking. It can be really taxing to constantly try to perform in a way that pleases everyone around you when actually you have your own ways of dealing with things. And if you could just be yourself, you wouldn't have that exhaustion. We might have a lot of expectations from our surroundings to function or perform in a way. We might have a lack of boundaries and not actually taught to say no to people and no to things. Often we also suffer from perfectionism, and often it's because we have received a lot of criticism growing up about the way we work that then sometimes get really obsessed with, I have to be really, really good. And if I'm really, really good, then no one will say anything bad about me. But the problem is, again, that's really exhausting. And in terms of ADHD as well, people with ADHD often chase dopamine. When I got bored in my job, I just took on more jobs and more extra tasks and all these extra things and all these extra hobbies because it was fun and it was rewarding. But at some point I was spinning 25 plates and then they all came crashing down. And for people with autism, it's also important to be aware that times of big transition can be stronger risk factors for burnout. So if routine changes, if the management changes, if the office setting changes in really drastic ways, that can be quite taxing for people with autism. So all of these are things to be aware of. So what can you do after all this depressing stuff to avoid burnout? The first thing is finding acceptance support. That might be tapping into existing networks or building new ones where you can discuss challenges of being neurodivergent and what that's like for you. And I know, Dom, when we talked about the slide, because it's a big matter for both of us, you also said it really helped you talk about people you otherwise wouldn't have talked about this. And I thought that was a really good pointer. We need to give ourselves space and time to unmask. Like, where's a space in my day, in my week, where I can just be unapologetically myself, where I can run around in the sensory comfy clothes and stim or do whatever I want to do? Is there ways to reduce your workload if it's too much? Develop self-understanding. For me, an important one is just understanding my brain and my needs, going back to those strategy tips. Because often I was so frustrated that things just didn't work for me. And just understanding, like, this is why I have a lack of dopamine. This is why. It just makes it a lot more easy to be kind to myself and actually say, okay, I need a different way of dealing with this. So figuring out what recharges you and what drains you. And then also important to maybe be aware of, there's different forms of rest. Often when people tell us to take self-care, I imagine myself having to sit in a bath and just relax. And I was like, this is the worst thing I could possibly imagine. I don't want to sit still. But when you also look at what other forms of rest are there, maybe rest is painting a picture and doing something creative that has nothing to do with work. Maybe it's going out with friends and being social. Maybe it's just emotional rest. Maybe for a while I don't want to have to deal with anyone's emotions. For some people, there might be a spiritual element and also sensory rest. Maybe if my whole day is loud and bright and shiny, where can I find a quiet corner? I have a really dark corner over there with fairy lights. This is like my withdrawal space. So figure out what rest you need, because it might not always be the typical one. Okay, this was the main part of our talk, and I'd love to go into Q&A, but just to reframe some of the key takeaways. ADHD and autism are really prevalent in the games industry because our strengths are perfect for it. You know, it makes us creative, it makes us obsessed and perfectionistic with the little things. So there's no wonder we get to a space where we are accepted as we are. And if we get support from others and from ourselves, our amazing brains can do really great things. Like some of the coolest people I know are all the neurodivergence folks I surrounded myself with, and they're all coming out of the closet one by one because they're all realizing, that's why. So, there is lots of cool people in the industry doing amazing things. There are some communities that can support you, so do find community. It can be paying attention to others, whatever makes you feel welcome and at home. As allies, we should tame our advice monster. It's really easy to try to want to help other people by telling them what works for us, but maybe instead get curious. What works for you? What do you need? And then masking is exhausting, and we are very prone to burnout. Take care so you can shine for longer. And I'm going to say, you can ask us anything now, and I'm also going to put this last slide on where we have all links, but again, you'll get all the slides, and I'll hand back over to Dan. So you can use the last 10 minutes and maybe a bit over time to ask us all the questions.
Yeah, last 10 minutes. Thank you both for such an insightful talk. So many good points there, which, of course, we'll be putting on the on our resource bank when this obviously becomes available as a VOD. I've already put the link in chat if you want the if you want to find the slides, as well as all these wonderful links. So yeah, let's get into Q&A. If you do have a question, under the chat, there should be a little icon with like triangle, square, and circle activities. If you click on there and go to Q&A, you'll be able to post a question in there. So I'm just going to start from top to bottom as people have been posting their questions. So first off, we've got Lauren. Thank you for today. I'll speak for you. Lauren asks, what are your personal experiences of your initial days working in the games industry, especially regarding to social interactions and tasks?
Dom, do you want to take this first?
So my initial, not only was I completely different to how I am now, I was very much more quiet and shy, but equally the industry was a different place almost a decade ago in terms of being even aware of neurodiversity, which we can still see today. I mean, the most prevalent example is, for example, I remember going to some networking events and where my whole body was on nervous flames internally because it was just going everywhere, like, oh, the ADHD was going in different directions of focusing, and with autism, the communication elements were kind of mixing in with that to make a concoction where from externally it just looks like I'm this awkward student / person in the event, but actually by being more open and being more inclusive, people could extend their hand and be more accepting and actually reach out. And what I eventually found as I did more activities, that did become the case. And I'm really happy now in the industry where that is more so happening rather than the latter. But I think the biggest kind of factors on that, just to say, is, if you get those nerves or butterflies in your gut at events, or you feel worried about elements of your neurodivergency, always think about the type of event you go to. Again, coming back to that point of just finding communities, finding events that they host, because by going to those smaller events and the smaller gatherings by these communities, you'll find more understanding people, you'll gain a rapport, and you'll see more faces that you recognize. And then as you go on to bigger events or just events that you're not aware of anyone being there, you'll suddenly go, oh, it's that guy Adam and that person Susie, and just start mingling more and more. So the ultimate advice from how I was, or approach, is if networking and events is kind of a new thing for you, or you get really nervous with it, always think towards those communities, always think about it as working up or just finding more friendly faces so that eventually everyone in the place is a friendly face.
So yeah, I'll keep my personal one really short. I found it really exciting to start working in games because I just felt I could be a bit more of my weird self, even though I didn't understand my ADHD back then. And I found it really fun that I could have my colorful hair and my piercings and show up. But also, after a short while, it ran me into serious problems like the burnout over the years, because I was like, ooh, old things, and no one's stopping me. So it has its ups and downs. Okay, Dan, do you want to give us another one?
Next one from Robin. Thank you for this. I'm an overachiever, but I'm always getting laid off due to my social difficulties. How do I let employers know that my social difficulties don't make me a bad worker? That's a big one. That's a big one right there.
That's a two-fold one. So I would say the first thing is a lot of your previous employers, without knowing your history, from the sounds of just that description, it doesn't seem that they valued you. They didn't seem like they recognized what you were bringing into them. So I would personally advise, don't take that fully on yourself. As Susie highlighted during one of her segments, think about your well-being. You know, what would you say to a friend if they said that to you? They'd probably be like, dude, you're amazing. You do fantastic stuff. Just keep going forward. And I believe that, you know, it's harder to do every day, but just from that kind of sense, it seems that plays a part. But equally, this is where researching your next companies, or just researching more widely and getting connected to these communities, I think will really benefit you, because by talking to people within the communities, you'll start hearing things more. And by doing those research, you know, is that company open with their policies? Are they, when someone applies to them, are they being given questions in advance? By doing all this knowledge gathering before you truly settle into that organization, you'll find the things that make you comfortable. And if there's more things that make you comfortable for a company, the more likely you're going to feel good there. While if there's more things that make you nervous and feel off, it's worth just going, sorry, not sorry, bye-bye.
And I'd also like to, because sometimes we get very unspecific feedback, like, oh, you know, you better engage with people socially. One good thing you can always do is ask for, can you make this very specific for me? What does this behavior look like? Because it can be very easy for employers to stay in that vagueness and then be confirmed. But if they actually have to verbalize, what is it you're not doing wrong that they're not happy with? Like, can you make it a behavior? Can you make it an action? So actually measure it, improve it, and improve it. That might be better. And also, overachieving is you know, something that we often do, but it comes at cost of energy that we don't have for other things. So in certain settings, I might have even said, like, I guess I might have to also reduce the extra effort I put into the things where I'm overachieving, so have some effort of the other things you want me to do that I'm struggling with. And if they're then unhappy with that, you know, they have to make that choice themselves, like what's more important to them.
I will also add to that quick, because I know I've saw it in the chat a little bit.
Please.
A couple of people mentioning like US or American-based companies or American-based laws. We're specifically talking about obviously UK, the UK games industry, UK regulations, UK law, you know, all of that sort of thing. So it may be different if you're obviously not in the UK. So I would defer to your local government, I suppose, rather than you know, there are things you can take away from this that will be applicable, but maybe not like the hard and fast rules. So I would look into that. Next question from Kamara. There's a couple here. We'll start off with, are certain roles affected by access to work restrictions, such as financial or legal roles? I think we have, Adam, I think you posted a link in chat to, I believe, a UK, so again, UK government specifically, document on access to work.
Yeah, so I'd say anything that's very specific access to work questions, like, is this acceptable? Does this work? Does this affect this? We'll leave those off, and we've provided the links, and I've added it to the resource bank. We'll provide it again afterwards, just because that goes into a specific level of like government detail we don't need to get into right now.
Cool.
Thank you.
Just to highlight on that, because I can give a bit of advice. So in general, most roles should have no issue with getting the support. However, again, similar to the diagnosis process, access to work alters depending on where you are in the geography / regions of the UK. So it's always best, if you have a question, ask the question to your access to work regional hub and or the main HQ, because they have to provide the answers since access is in the name.
Yeah, because obviously London or the major city hubs like London down the south, and then different areas of the UK, they have different economic factors and social factors apply to them. Next one again from Kamara. What advice would you give to neurodivergent people who want to show they're passionate and willing to learn for a role during interviews, but may spend their free time recovering, so have less capacity to do additional studying or courses?
I need to read that. Sorry, my process is broken.
I think
Yeah.
if I'm getting it right, it's how do you show you're passionate if you have that's fine, Kamara. Yeah, so it's a lot about, I guess, transferable skills. How do you show those skills even if you have maybe reduced access due to obviously neurodivergent issues or economic issues? How do we break down those barriers? Which is, again, a big question.
I mean, oh, you go, sir.
No, you go. You go. Then I can think about
Someone go.
I'll go, because I've always I kind of relate to this question in my early days of doing my EDI work, because in essence, I have never qualified. This is not a role which you qualify for. It's very much you're coming on, you're bringing on, and you're always living and learning. And with that in mind, it's a lot to take on. It's quite broad. It's quite essence. And the fundamental thing about kind of that needing to time for, whether it's recovery, whether it's more just adaptation of life-work balance, I would say it's vital to have daily conversations, whether that's with a manager or with a part of the leadership who you work with around managing your role, because again, having those conversations, you can bring out the passion and emphasize the challenges you face, but also what reasonable adjustments or support you need to have from the employer. Because again, as we've talked about with burnout, if they don't support it, you'll get more and more. And what we don't want to see is that explode, and they won't want to see that explode if they truly are there for you. And I guess and it's a much deeper question, but if you are having those conversations and nothing's changing, maybe there's something more to that.
Yeah, I'd also say that when it comes, because it sounds a bit like you are in an application process and during interview process, and then they expect you to do more stuff during that time. So I'd kind of try to figure out through some questions to manage some expectations, or ask questions in a way and show from past experience so you've been able to overcome those barriers before. So for example, if they say, oh, we expect you to be able to do this within the first 3 weeks of the job, and you're a bit concerned that you won't be able to learn all this before the job, you can maybe refer to a time where you have actually had to pick up a skill and what helped you do it, and just check in with them if that would work for them. Or if they give you like a lot of stuff that they want you to pick on, you can maybe also just ask a bit more for clarification, like, if I can only manage one of those 3, what's the most important to you? What would be a good way to show you what that looks like successfully? I've definitely asked it before, like after an interview when they got to ask me questions, I was like, is there anything I said that makes you concerned I couldn't do this job? And they were a bit like, oh, taken aback. And then they actually pointed out a question to me that I had answered well, because I just started rambling, and then I had like a chance to rephrase it a little bit and give a better example. So often it's also just good to ask them, what do they perceive as an actual challenge, or is it just a thing you think you should be improving? Sorry, that was very rambly, also not very well worded, but I hope it made some sense.
Just like an actual job interview.
Yes.
Um,
We have one more question. I know we're 5 minutes over, but I think we can do one or two more.
One more. Let me try and pick. I'll pick the most upvoted one. Does that sound fair?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, no. That one's about access to work. We'll park that a second. Of course. Sorry, I'm just looking through these now. Let's see. And here we go. Kamara again. I'm sorry. There's two. We'll get to two if we can get to two. So last one from Kamara. Any advice for handling nerves or anxiety when attending networking events? Oh, networking while neurodivergent. I've not been waiting for an answer of this question for a long time.
So one thing I do is I try to look for one person in the room that looks more nervous than me, and I talk to them. Because I find I really struggle when people are standing in a group and they're already chatting to each other. I really struggle to get there, but sometimes I go up to people that just stand in the corner and look really uncomfortable, and I'm, hey, do you also not know anyone? Do you also not know what to do? So sometimes just bonding over that shared experience can help. I'm definitely not claiming to be a pro here. I've recently been to some networking events, so I was like, this was amazing. And I went to another one recently where I talked to one person, and then I got so distraught because I couldn't find anyone to talk to, and I went home. So also normalize that sometimes you might just have a bad day. Maybe this is not your socializing day, and be kind to yourself if that happens. But if you do, for me, it helps to just look for someone else who looks lost, and then get to them here. That's one advice. And also asking people questions about themselves. So rather than talk myself, I will just go into like, what's your pet? What's your favorite hobby? What's your favorite dinosaur? I ask them really weird questions. Because if they come back with their favorite dinosaur, they might also be neurodivergent, and then we click. So sometimes I ask weird questions to just see what happens. Dom, do you have anything to add?
I mean, you captured a bit of the end bit, I would say, because, people love to talk about themselves. I'm definitely not someone who does. But equally, by approaching people with those questions to find out more about themselves, they'll start to engage. And, if it's a conversation that you're feeling comfortable with due to their answers, you start then to. But if that doesn't work for you, then my other two highlights to say is, going back to Susie's first suggestion of, do look for people who are in a similar body language or situation to you, because generally you'll probably find out that they are very similar, maybe even neurodivergent themselves. But then the third thing is, I would always look out for, for example, if the event's being organized by, again, one of the communities we've mentioned during this webinar, always look out for members of those teams who will be on hand to provide support, advice, and generally help introduce. One thing that I say to just generally any event organizer as a standard is provide some form of visual or physical element of helping people network, whether that's a little question card to ask interesting questions, or using either name badges, stickers, or wristbands through a color-coded system that allows people to connect to each other through, for example, if it's green, often at some events it's about hugging and being willing to talk to anyone, or if it's amber, it's someone who's brand new to events or needs a bit of encouragement to get into conversation, or if it's someone with a red wristband, it might be someone who's completely new or such. But again, using what's features and elements are established at the event, such as a color-coded traffic light networking system, or having the support from the event organizers themselves, I would say are the optimal things when there's not someone with a similar body language to you and or questions that you've asked people are not indicating conversational points that you want. Because I know for a fact that if I start off with, do you like Transformers? Do you like anime? I generally not get that conversation point unless I'm at the right event. But I generally would start off with, oh, nice to meet you. My name is, oh, I see that you're this. I'd love to hear more. And then obviously, having those basic insert phrases will then allow you to build more and more conversations and go from there.
Yeah, I will quickly add, I think we probably got to close, right?
Yeah.
Last comment I'll add is Adam's put in the chat. I want to point this out. You can also help people by never closing the circle. If you're trying to friends or people at an event, make sure you leave a gap in the circle so other or new people can join in, which is absolutely great. And yeah, thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to literally all of them, but there were some really good questions there, some really good conversations had there, and great answers from Susie and Dom. So thank you very much, you two, for answering those. You
should also be able to turn on your microphones now. I just want to say goodbye in person. But thank you so much for coming.
There's also on the topic of social events. If you are going to develop Brighton this year, which is a major kind of conference within the UK, Playing Attention will be hosting an ADHD friendly event, as we've done for the past 4 years now. Is it, Adam?
2 years.
2 years. I feel like it was longer than that.
You're taking it from my event, but I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, there's the past 2 years. This will be the third one. We've been doing a ADHD friendly lunch. Let me, Adam, if you've got the link for that, can you quickly? Already done. Cool. Yeah, so we've got a ADHD friendly lunch at Develop. If you want to come to that, link is in the chat. We will obviously add that to wherever we can. And thank you all for turning up this evening. And please go get food. Go hydrate. Because I know I need
yes, you can then test Adam and the crew if the circle technique at the event, because if they close the circle, you can be like, "You lied to me, Adam. You lied."
And that is a great icebreaker. If you come up to me and go, "You lied," I will know why, and that's fair enough. I accept it.
Oh, and you will receive a form that you can fill out to give us some feedback on this, because it's very helpful for us. But don't worry, get your food. Thank you so much for coming. You've all been wonderful, and I hope you had a night. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We're really nice. Dom and I, we don't fight, and I'm pretty sure Adam and Dan also don't.
Well, they wouldn't start the organization, would they?
To be fair, Adam started it, and I've come along to help. So yeah, I don't bite. Only if you have food in your hand. That's different. I'm just incredibly hungry. I'm sorry.
That's on you then. At that point.
Yeah, that's a me problem.
Thanks, everyone.